BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
After 7 years of deliberating, the Welsh Government unveils the future for the country's farmers with a Sustainable Farming Scheme, or SFS, as the current basic payment scheme is wound down. Farmers will be encouraged to take part in the new system, which will pay them for sustainable food production and protecting the environment. The whole farm scheme has been welcomed by some.
What the Welsh Government have said is that they will not require tenants to do anything which they are not allowed to do under the terms of their tenancy, but still give them full access to the scheme.
But it's been criticised by others.
It's a start, but the scheme needs to go an awful lot further.
Well, it's a massive change, so we are devoting the whole of today's programme to the new Sustainable Farming Scheme in Wales. Let's start with the overall structure. At the moment, farmers still get money through the Basic Payment Scheme, or BPS, which was set up under the old pre-Brexit Common Agricultural Policy. Any farmer not joining the new Sustainable Farming Scheme will see those basic payments drop by 40% next year, which is when the new system comes in. The SFS has 3 layers: the universal, the optional and the collaborative. To receive payments, farmers will have to commit to actions. To comply with the most basic, the universal layer, farmers will have to carry out 12 actions, choosing from a list which includes soil health, integrated pest management, tree and hedgerow planting and animal health and welfare. The next layer is called optional, which includes more complex commitments and higher payments. And the final layer is called collaborative. This is for large-scale projects carried out by groups of farmers. The Welsh Government has committed to the same budget on the universal layer as this year's budget for the BPS. That's £238 million. And the total amount spent on all 3 layers next year will be £340 million. But the budget for the new scheme is being set annually, something which is worrying farmers. One of the groups of stakeholders who are consulted on all of this is the Tenant Farmers Association. 27% of land in Wales is farmed by tenants. The TFA's chief executive, George Dunn, gave me his reaction to the SFS announcement.
So the biggest thing that's new for tenant farmers in the Sustainable Farming Scheme is that the Welsh Government has completely understood that on some occasions tenant farmers may be restricted either by the legislation which governs those agreements or by the agreements themselves, that they may be restricted in fulfilling all of the aspects of the universal actions, the 12 universal actions. And what the Welsh Government have said is that they will not require tenants to do anything which they are not allowed to do under the terms of their tenancy, but still give them full access to the scheme. So it's a really pragmatic decision by the Welsh Government to do that.
What changes have been made then since the last proposals?
So we've seen the number of universal actions reduce, and those universal actions which remain have been through some rigorous discussion, and they have been pared back to what's practical. Obviously, the controversial tree planting requirement, the 10% tree planting target, is now out, but there are some planting targets that have been set for aspirational tree planting. And the payment rates have obviously been announced, which are, I think, for most people, better than we were expecting, and it's really good that the Deputy First Minister has managed to retain the £340 million in the budget for the scheme, at least for 2026.
And are you expecting the majority of tenant farmers to be able to join in with this?
Well, we see no reason why tenant farmers will not be able to join, at least in respect of the universal actions. We do need to watch very carefully when it comes to the optional and collaborative actions, because those are perhaps going to be some of the more valuable bits of the scheme, because they are delivering more from an environmental perspective. But it may be that's where we will find problems with landlords not allowing access to schemes for those elements. So that's an area which we're watching for. And also, this is a much, much more complicated scheme than we are replacing with the basic payment scheme. And we need the Rural Payments Wales to be operating in a way which isn't being heavy-handed, because everybody will want to do the best to be participating in this scheme.
George Dunn, Chief Executive of the Tenant Farmers Association. Well, one of the main goals of the SFS is to improve biodiversity and habitats for wildlife while encouraging sustainable farming methods. However, conservationists have called the new scheme a missed opportunity. Arvon Williams is Head of Land and Sea Policy at RSPB Wales. He told me it wasn't ambitious enough.
Going by what we've seen, then it's pretty kind of low-hanging fruit. This is bringing farmers into the scheme, getting them to recognise the habitats they've got and hopefully to start managing the existing habitats in a more favourable way. But that in itself, unfortunately, won't really come close to really getting to grips with restoring nature, addressing kind of the nature emergency. It's a start, but the scheme needs to go an awful lot further.
So some environmental groups have described this as a missed opportunity. Would you say that?
I think it's a start. No, I think it's a start. I think, we can see where government is coming from. It needs to be a popular scheme. What's disappointing is we haven't seen the upper layers yet, so we don't know how the scheme is going to work. And we don't have an indication of how effective those will be yet. So whether it's going to be a missed opportunity or not, we don't know. I mean, potentially yes, but we need to make sure those upper layers work.
There is one point, I think, that's quite clear, that the government has dropped that 10% tree cover, but it has said that farmers must have 10% habitat on their farms. What do you make of that change?
Yeah, so we certainly welcome the ongoing requirement for a minimum of 10% habitat. That's a great start. The decision to drop the 10% tree target, well, that's been made. What's vital now is that Welsh Government works with the farming sector to come up with an alternative that will ensure farming plays its fair part in meeting climate change commitments and targets.
Arvon Williams from RSPB Wales. So what should farmers make of this? Most farmers in Wales rely on these payments. An average of 67% of Welsh farm incomes came from subsidies in 2020-2021. The changes come in on the 1st of January next year, which doesn't seem far away. Any farmer not taking up the new SFS will face an immediate 40% cut in payments, and those who remain outside the new system will face a 60% cut in 2027. NFU Cymru was involved in the negotiations about the new system. President Aled Jones told me how he sees it.
The scheme has to work. We have no other options. We are still awaiting an impact assessment. I hope, as and when that impact assessment is available, that we will see some modifications to safeguard that there is no financial damage to the rest of the industry. So cautious optimism would be one word, and hoping that we can have further changes that might be required as well.
I mean, are you happy with it?
The structure of the scheme is absolutely right. Having a universal layer where all farmers are able to participate. And I hope that's the significance of getting as many farmers as possible. But they've got to, take the barriers away. And then having additional elements in the optional collaborative is the right design. And we've always said that, and we need to get it to work properly.
Your response has been critical of the fall in BPS payments from next year. But surely won't farmers be able to recoup that loss by taking up these SFS schemes?
Back in November, farmers were given the option by Welsh Government, stating very clearly that they did not wish farmers to be facing a cliff edge on funding. And they wanted to make sure that the transition from BPS to the SFS was as smooth as possible to give farmers the confidence in that transition from the two schemes. So an equal step reduction was presented to farmers. They will now feel that they are being pushed, coerced, whatever, into signing up to the scheme right from the first year, 2026. And a little bit of concern, particularly as all the scheme details are not yet available.
The previous stipulation of 10% tree cover has been dropped, hasn't it? But there is a 10% habitat commitment. How do you feel about that?
Well, it was a sensible decision to drop the 10% mandatory tree requirements because, it wouldn't work for many, many farms. The habitat, what has been granted is more flexibility on what could actually be provided in terms of creating temporary habitat.
NFU Cymru President Aled Jones, well, as we heard, the union has criticised the rapid fall in BPS payments for farmers who don't join the new scheme. I asked the Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs, Huw Irranca-Davies, whether the government had reneged on its promise not to have a cliff edge in payments.
I do appreciate the fact that the BPS taper is faster than perhaps originally envisaged, but actually we're 12 months further down the line now as well. So if we'd have started the scheme a year ago, we would have been doing that 40% taper by now anyway. But the important thing here is we are genuinely trying to encourage farmers as well to transition from the BPS, which will in effect be a legacy scheme, into the SFS, which is for now and for the future. And we've also made sure that some of the payments within, for example, the optional layer are more generous in the first 3 years, specifically to encourage people to get into the scheme early and to draw down those payments.
Can you guarantee, though, that the SFS payments will be equivalent to the BPS payments if farmers do take it up on the universal layer?
So we've guaranteed that the SFS and the transition from BPS to SFS is that quantum of funding that we said we would do, and we have. Those entrants who actually come into it, they've got that certainty of that stability in the universal layer of the scheme. As importantly, they'll be able to access, when they enter the scheme, the optional and the collaborative layers as well. So some of the calculations that individual farmers will have to do, we can help with. We're going to be providing from next week onwards something of a ready reckoner so that farmers will be able to calculate what this will mean for them on their individual farm.
The budget will be decided annually. Why are you doing that? That doesn't give confidence to farmers, does it?
It's precisely the same as we've done for the last several years since we've left the EU. It's been an annual budget settlement, not dissimilar to what they do in other governments as well. The great thing about this scheme is we've devised it, though, on a whole farm basis. And what that means is we're looking at really productive farms. We're looking at innovation within farms. We're looking at high animal welfare standards and food security and food delivery. But we're also looking at climate and nature as well. That's the strongest possible argument.
Yeah, well, on that point, WWF Cymru and RSPB Wales both call this a missed opportunity for conservation. The RSPB says it's sustainable in name only.
Well, we disagree, because if you look at even on the universal level, for the first time ever, any farmer who enters this scheme, there will be 10% habitat managed for nature and for biodiversity. There are elements within it to do with the quality, not just the quantity of hedgerows within the universal level. There is numbers of those within the universal layer alone. But the real win for nature and for biodiversity and for climate resilience comes within the optional and collaborative layers. That's why we've designed this to be accessible to all farmers as possible, to encourage farmers to come in, including the steeper taper, by the way, into the universal layer, but then to draw down the additional funds that were...
Aren't you forcing them into it rather than encouraging them?
No, we're working with farmers and putting the right financial incentives in place, because those financial incentives are also then within the optional and collaborative additional funding streams to do other great things, such as working together on landscape scale. So there will be additional options and collaborative elements that farmers can also draw down to give them more business resilience as well. So it's a win-win.
Welsh Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs, Huw Irranca-Davies. That's all from us. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Rebecca Rooney. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.